organizations that we work with have been working with child access rights for over at least 30 years collectively. So, solidarity with different organizations working in this space, individuals and groups, education, which we'll be focusing on so people understand what child alienation is, why it is a form of abuse and domestic violence, and of course, advocacy. So, getting active and making sure that we change the way things are done in relation to children's rights and mental health. And so, we improve the mental health of our children in our country and society, and of course, around the world. Remember, we're broadcasting on 3 different platforms today, SACCAR and Transformative Health Justice. Remember to share this broadcast widely and for people to have access to information. Our website, of course, www.childalienationsA.co.za. We've just launched that website. And of course, you can find us on Facebook at SACCAR. The outline of the program, again, the introduction, which we've just completed. We'll be interviewing Solomon Mondlane. He's from the Amazing Dads Network, very active in the child access space, as well as Kirsten Raman from the Equality Foundation, talking about their experiences related to child alienation, but also the work of their organizations and what they believe needs to change. So critical information there, followed by an interview with Professor Stats Cooper about the impact of co-parenting versus child alienation. And as I mentioned before we went down for a little while, we'll be talking about the program for SACCAR coming up in the next year and the years to come, and a public call to action. All right, so with that being said, I'm going to introduce now Carmen Amoki, and let's tell you a little bit about Carmen. She is part of SACCAR, of course, the South African Coalition for Child Access Rights. She's studying an LLB at UNISA, having received a bursary from the Riva Rebecca Steenkamp Foundation, as well as the Mediation Academy of South Africa. She received the Women in Business Award from Margaret Hirsch, an Inspirational Women Award from FAK, and she believes that no child should be abused in any way, and that parental alienation is child abuse. And perhaps most importantly and relevant for the launch of SACCAR, Carmen Moki is an alienated parent who is out here making a difference for the mental health of our children. Carmen's going to be introducing first to us Solomon Mondlane. Let's bring her into studio.
Hi, good day,
Carmen
everybody.
Moki, welcome to the launch of SACCAR.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, international people affected and influenced by child alienation, I would like to introduce you to Solomon Mondlane. Solomon is a father in South Africa. He's also a parent to 7 children, and he formed an organization during his 11-day hunger strike and walk almost halfway across South Africa for the cause of alienation. Solomon has since then organized many active once-in-a-lifetime contests or protests against the Department of Social Development, something that Solomon wants to achieve. It's quite a high price. Is Solomon Mondlane's foundation is in pursuit to have the Department of Social Development completely shut down the CMR, which is a Dutch Reformed Church organization funded by the DSD. And it would be very interesting to hear Solomon's thoughts and experiences as a parent, where he has experienced child alienation here in South Africa.
Thank you very much, Carmen Moki, for that introduction. Carmen, we'll just move you backstage for now, and we're going to bring Solomon into the SACCAR launch. Welcome, Solomon Mondlane, to the launch of SACCAR. Please unmute your mic.
Thank you, Palisa. It's good to see you again, and greetings to everybody watching us live on SACCAR Facebook.
Thank you, Solomon.
Yes.
It's wonderful to have you on. Of course, the founder of the Amazing Dads Network. And the topic we'll be focusing on with you today, Solomon, is the impact of the Children's Amendment Bill. But of course, we have to give that some context. So for the next 25 minutes or so, we'll be talking about areas that are related to the rights of children and their mental health when it comes to child access. So, Solomon, Carmen's given us an introduction into, your situation and where you come from. Where are you with your case now? in terms of access to your children, Nanette and Seth?
Thank you, Palisa. Very, very interesting question. I think I've come to the crossroad of my case, where actually the corruption and what I've been complaining about for the past 4 years is being displayed, and the people are not ashamed of still protecting themselves. For example, on the 17th of May, my case was on. I didn't attend. The presiding officer, Magistrate Fenter, actually issued a document for the first time. All these years, she never issued a document, a secret document that allows social workers to continue manipulating my case. Unfortunately, that document was emailed to me, and it says that the social workers must still continue investigating. Now, I was so shocked because she has 6 reports in front of her. More than 11 social workers have worked on this case. Many events has happened which she could have made a decision long ago. Remember that she said on December to December that she couldn't make a decision because she had no report. And I asked myself, where is CMR's reports? There are 2 reports from CMR. Where are those reports? Because those were the people who started working on this case. DSD was forced by me during the hunger strike to take over from CMR. Now she was saying she couldn't make a decision in 2017 because she had no report, which is a lie. Now she has issued a document.
Can I ask you to just pause there, Solomon? Solomon, can I just ask you to pause there? When last have you seen your children?
Nanette, the elder one, I last saw her in 2017. I've never seen her because they said she doesn't want to see me. They're still going to take her for therapy. Actually, they said she's doing therapy now, but they were lying. Nanette is not attending any therapy. Seth, I saw Seth last year, October, which was our 3rd engagement, which the social worker was happy. And she said within 3 weeks, Seth will be staying with me full time. But now, with all the corruption trying to cover up what they've been doing, that has not happened up to this day. And now there is this secret document which was issued to protect DSD and CMR social workers. And I'm asking myself that when Fenter just introduced this document, when she knows that she's leaving the Pretoria North Children's Court, she just did it because she knows she's not part of that court anymore.
Solomon, you raise a very, very important point there, of corruption. And that's something that many alienated or targeted parents and families raise, corruption in the family law system. We've got a comment here, and I want to ask people who are commenting to please add your name at the end of your comment so that we know who you are, or add the word anonymous. So this is Facebook user saying, I agree, CMR must be shut down. I know there have been investigations into CMR, and perhaps we need to have an entire program dedicated to what's going on, in that particular organization, and invite CMR to come and give their perspective on their role within the social development system and how that affects the mental health of our children. But Solomon, tell us more about where you are in your case now.
I'm waiting because I opposed, because they sent me that document, which I don't know what it is. I'm not a lawyer, but they sent me via email. Then I opposed via email. So I'm waiting for the 21st of June. What action are they going to tell me or to take? Because in that document, they said it will expire on the 21st of June this year. So I want to see what exactly they are going to do, because Magistrate Fenter is no longer there. She has been handling this case for the past 4 years. And the manager for the Pretoria North Court and the clerk, they are no longer responding to my emails. But I'll be waiting, because I know their tricks. I know how they play things now. Having on this case for 4 years, I know what they want to do. You see,
Solomon,
but I will wait
let me ask you to pause there, Solomon. Your matter's going on for the last 4 years, and you're saying that emails and phone calls are not responded to. Would you say that there is a complete breakdown in the human rights related ecosystem for children in our country, and this is leading to mental health issues for children?
To them, it's really what they are doing is not about the children, it's about themselves. Remember, on the 2nd of December, one social worker, when she was refusing with the report which I was demanding to have, which is about me and my children, she then said, after Fenter gave it to me, she then said, I'm protecting my job. What I'm doing, I'm protecting my. It's all about themselves. They don't care what's happening with the rights of the children, the rights of a. It's all about themselves. This I say, I started saying this in 2017. It's a web of corruption. Social workers, attorneys, magistrates, psychologists, they form this web. If they're busy drafting this bill, which they're drafting, but at the end, they will call lawyers to work on it and give us their final draft, which is going to really violate our rights and the rights of the children.
So we'll talk about the Children's Amendment Bill in a second. But Solomon, you have really fought for your children's rights and you're still fighting. You've never given up on them. From a hunger strike to a walk for freedom, for their, freedom to love and be with their father. What kind of impact do you think your advocacy, your work in this area for child access rights, what kind of impact have you seen this make in the national struggle for children's mental health and access to their parents?
After all those campaigns, they couldn't ignore me. That's why we're having these hearings on the Children's Amendment Bill this year. That's why we're having access to Parliament to voice our views. So they couldn't ignore me. I know that the DSD head office, they've blocked my emails. But now what is very interesting is that when they blocked, they released a media statement saying that the court shouldn't stop in the way of fathers who are fighting to have full custody of their children. So they couldn't really block me. They couldn't even ignore me. That's why we're having the whole country engaged in this process where we are amending the Children's Act Bill.
Let's talk about this Children's Amendment Act. What is your analysis of this act? Does it address the issues related to co-parenting, equality between parents, and access?
Actually, the government, they've realized that they have nowhere to go or to run. Now they are bringing up something that when things really get worse, as fathers in the main are putting pressure, when things get really not on their side, they know that now they will fall into this event which is happening, the amendment bill. So, but there is nothing much that is changing, because most of the things which they are now proposing, they've been there in our constitution. There is nothing much. So it's just something that they want to guide them, to protect themselves in future. For example, no one can decide if a father qualifies to be a full father or not. No one must decide on that. No family advocate who should qualify a father. You automatically, when a child is born, you are qualified as a father, unless otherwise, of which this can happen to a father or a mother. If you are abusive to your children, then there is something that needs to be checked on you. But really, to say fathers need to qualify fathers, and you remove the other part, as if this child is born by one parent, that's really something that they're not addressing the issues we are really complaining about. So really, this exercise which is happening is not really actually addressing, but it says to me they are recognizing our voices. And I still believe, as this exercise is happening, this amendment bill can still, the constitution on the children's side can still change. Is there recognition?
So Solomon, there are going to be hearings around the country on this Children's Amendment Bill. Do you have any more details on that? Where would one find information for the different provinces? So alienated or targeted parents and children can attend, families can attend, and give their input as to how the laws need to change to protect the mental health of our children, parents, and families.
It's so sad that what they are doing, even our parliament, the information is not coming out the way we were expecting it to come out, of where they will be and all that. But thanks to the Fathers for Justice, Gary is trying to really push them to also release, even if the timing is sometimes not on our side. But we always visit Fathers for Justice page to see the information when they will be. Like in Northwest, I know that they will be Northwest on the 22nd of June. But if they can visit Fathers for Justice page, then they will find some of the information which Gerida Silva is trying to push for us. And also, we are fathers, we are parents. Castro is also busy sharing on his page. So we appreciate the work they are doing.
Thank you for that, Solomon. Let's take a comment here. Facebook user, it is appalling that social workers can state they don't have experience in dealing with alienation and refuse to address their reports or lack of it. Now I must take that the family advocate report to the High Court and argue it there with very little chance to get the High Court accept our argument over the family advocate's report. Another comment, Facebook user will visit the page Fathers for Justice. Solomon, you've been involved in child access rights for parents, for a very long time, for 4 years, in fact. What are the challenges for parents in care and access cases? Because it sounds to me that the status quo is being maintained, which then leads to further conflict between parents. It feels like the stage is being set for further conflict and ongoing conflict between parents, which of course benefits certain stakeholders. The fact that this conflict just continues endlessly. So, in your analysis, what are the challenges facing parents in our children's rights system?
On paper, everything looks good. But in practical, when we are going to court, because we always trust our justice system, things turns ugly. You are not going to be heard. And this is what needs to change. Even today, there are so many fathers in the main who are really finding it difficult to break this wall and get into to see or to have access to their children, mainly because there are lawyers, there are people who think they know better our children than we fathers know them, and these are the people who make sure that red tape is active, because this what benefits their pockets. This what benefits them financially. And I'm telling you, even if we're working on this bill, this Children's Act bill, their eyes and their mind, they are working around to maintain the money that has been flowing into their pockets. And they're not going to just give up easily, because this is where they make money. So it is still difficult for parents. We don't know after this, once they conclude these hearings, whether things will change. But it's so difficult for parents, especially those who are alienated, especially fathers in the most, to really have access to their children without any stumbling blocks. It's still difficult. I get so many inboxes. Some people think I'm a lawyer, of which I'm not. I was just introduced into this system because after the death of the mother of my children. But otherwise, I'm just an expert in my case, because I know people, they send their cases, I read through them, I discover that yes, we all want to have custody to our children, but at the end of the day, the background of our cases are different, and they need people who specializes on those cases. I cannot advise a person based on my personal case, but I'm an expert to my case. That's why even when volunteer lawyers come, sometimes they don't understand each other, because I know better my case than they do.
Of course, that's a very, very important point. Each case has a different dynamic, it has different parties involved, but very importantly, it has children who are mentally traumatized because they are in the middle of this conflict and often feel like hostage because one parent doesn't want to co-parent, or their understanding of what co-parenting is does not align with the right to equality, enshrined in our constitution. And it's a point that many parents, both fathers and mothers, make, that alternative weekend access is not equality. It's not in the best interest of the child. It doesn't allow the child to build a strong bond with both parents. And that parenting plans can creatively be drafted such that the child's mental health is centered and that both parents have an equal amount of access to the rights. to the child, which of course makes life easier for them as well. They can focus on building their lives. They know that the child is in a good space with the other parent, and it simplifies so many of the issues that we face when it comes to access, which we'll be also talking with Kirsten Raman from the Equality Foundation with shortly. Solomon, what do you think is the way forward in your case? What's going to be the solution? How are you going to finally have access to your children? Because we understand that their mum, may she rest in peace, has passed on, and we understand from what you say to us that she would want for you to be the guardian of the children. They are your children. So, what is the way forward in your case? What do you think is going to make that difference?
Desmond Tutu once said, "No truth, no future." You know, now this case is not about the grandparents, because the grandparents has proved to everybody who they are. Last year, they insulted the social workers, threatened her, held hostage my son who was supposed to come and visit, insulted my brother who went to take my child. She did everything. Now the problem is with the DSD social workers, because the CMR social workers were taken off the case. It's also with the legal aid attorneys who just come and detect things without knowing the case. And all of these people, they want to protect their master. They want to protect even the minister who called me, who referred to me as a flight risk, Lindiwe Zulu. Also, the deputy minister to Lindiwe Zulu, who said, I'm abusing my little daughter, Azania, who I don't know where that information she got. They are trying to protect them, because even the document that have been just released from court secretly was meant to protect the minister of the DST, because she has been demanding for a court order that gives the right to the parents, to the grandparents of my children, to stay with my children, of which there is no court order of that matter. So this case needs the truth, people to go back and check where it went wrong, and actually come and open up and say, this is the way forward. This is what we can do.
What is the way forward, Solomon? What kind of agreement would you consider to be fair, equitable, and healthy in the circumstances?
The agreement must be guided by the law. And the law says once one partner is not there, the other partner takes over the children. I can't be sitting here fighting against the grandparents. Those are not their children. They need to apply in the court of law to say we want to have access. Instead, they want me to apply to have access to my children. That's what the law says. They need to apply. Then I must also approve their application, not them. But now it's vice versa. Now, how do you want to wrap the law and make it vice versa when it's not saying that? I'm sitting here waiting and watching the lawmakers. What are they actually doing? And yes, years are going. Nanette now is in adolescent stage, 13 years of age. We shouldn't be talking about her name now, because, you know, again, when a child reaches that stage, really she needs more privacy. Seth is growing up, also should be manipulated like Nanette. What is the way forward, Palisa? The way forward is me waiting for the law, because they draft the law. What's the law saying? We can't just do things outside the law, because tomorrow it will give us problems.
Okay, we're talking about the law and problems, Solomon. What needs to change in the laws to protect the mental health of children and, by extension, parents and families? How does the law need to change?
It's actually, they must prioritize that. They need to listen to the voice of a child, what the child needs, and the parents. They must prioritize the voice of a child. They must prioritize the voice of the parent. The grandparents and other relatives, they come later, after really seeing the relationship between the parent and the child. When I made my submission in Parliament, I spoke about the family tree, which I was taught in grade 1, grade 2, the importance of family tree. There is a child on top, then there are parents underneath, then there are relatives underneath the parents of the child. It makes a healthy, beautiful tree when everybody are involved. Imagine in my case, only the maternal grandparents and relatives are involved in the lives of my children. If the family advocate says I must go for psychological evaluation, my uncle said in return, that means all the paternal relatives must go for psychological evaluation, because these children were removed from the family of the father completely. That means the whole family in the maternal side are all well. So it's really, they must look at issues that are raised so that they can make the wholeness, the balance constitution or Children's Act, which really will support the child growing up.
Solomon, can I ask you to please switch the light on if you are not going through load shedding? We're just finding it difficult to see you there, my brother.
I mean,
Are you
load shedding.
You're in load shedding. Okay, I
Yes,
understand. I
yeah,
understand.
yeah.
All right. So Solomon, what is your message to your children? Assuming one day Nanette and Seth are going to see this launch of the South African Coalition for Child Access Rights, all of these individuals, groups, organizations, and supporters and allies working together for children's mental health, children's human rights. What would your message be to them?
I love my children. I love my children. I know Nanette has openly said to the social workers, I don't want to see my father. Ever since he left when my mother died, he doesn't care about me. I care about her. I know, the thing when I started fighting in 2017, I've been saying, let them remove the children from toxic environment to avoid what is happening to Nanette now. Now they're keeping Seth. Seth is 9, he's fighting his way to his father. They are blocking Seth. Seth will also tend to be what Nanette is. And these are the social workers. They are watching a child being destroyed and also creating that poisonous environment between me and my children and my son, which is happening to Nanette. But really, I love them. I love my children. I couldn't have walked 100 kilometers from Witbank to Pretoria. I couldn't stay there 11 days trying to push what is happening today with the amendment bill. I couldn't, go, strip, my privacy in public, speaking everything just to have to be heard. So it shows how much I love them. But if it happens that one day, because you can't guarantee, I die without seeing them, they must know Papa fought, and they will continue the struggle.
Papa fought. That's a very beautiful, very beautiful statement and memory for you, Solomon. We certainly know how hard you've been struggling, and certainly you wouldn't have done what you've done unless you love your children. And now that you are, working with the Amazing Dads movement, you're giving advice to other parents who are alienated so that you can help their children have their rights to their parents. So this is indeed about all our children. Want to take a comment. Here, Solomon, let's just have a look. This seems to be somebody who is also experiencing alienation. I haven't seen my son since January. He told the social worker that he has no memory of me. He is 7. We've been apart since October 2020. My son and I had the closest relationship from all my children. Today, my 2 older children are despising their mum even more for what they are witnessing their mum is doing. And their mum is using the hostility towards her to further influence the 7-year-old son. We asked the family if they can overlook the lack of memory by my 7-year-old son. And that's where the comment seems to be finished. If it's a longer comment, we can't see the rest of it. Perhaps you could comment with the rest of it. But that's quite painful, isn't it? He has a child who he's not seen. This is the dad now since October 2020, and the child we had a close relationship with now saying he's got no memory of his father. I mean, imagine the trauma. What would lead a child to say, I've got no memory of my father? And that's, only been a couple of months. Solomon, can you talk about the mental anguish of this child and this parent?
A child will always be told negative things about the parent. That's how they manage to destroy and manipulate the brain of a child. Nothing good they will say about the alienated parent. Nothing good they will say. So it will always be very, 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 very painful thing to work around. It really needs therapists. It needs psychologists. People who really cares. Though we have those who are corrupt in the children's courts, which are looking for money and all that, but there are those who cares about the well-being of our children.
And so those are the people that we need to turn to within the system. If you know of social workers, psychologists, members of the legal fraternity, of course, SACCAR prefers mediation over litigation. and you would like to recommend them for being ethical and for supporting equity between parents and co-parenting with 50-50 as the starting point, and of course prioritizing the mental health of the children, drop us an email with their details on info@childalienationsA.co.za. Carmen, we'll be introducing Kirsten Raman in a couple of minutes, in 3 minutes exactly. Maybe you can try and get hold of him so we can link him into the conversation there, Carmen, if you can hear me. Solomon, what are your thoughts now on the launch of the South African Coalition for Child Access Rights?
I'm happy that we are doing this. It shows unity. It shows that our voice will grow bigger and bigger and bigger. This is not about us, Padisa. This is about the future generations of this world. You know, if we protect them, we are guaranteed that when we leave, they're not going to go and curse our graves. They will be happy that we stood up for them, we fought for them. So I'm excited that we're speaking in one voice. We'll understand exactly what's happening in our laws, in our courts, and all that, and how to bring together in a very professional and honest way the social workers, the lawyers, magistrates, the psychologists, and mediators to sit down in one table and look what is in the best interest of a child. The best interest of a child is actually defined in a family tree, which I was taught in grade 1 and 2. So that's a complete best interest of a child, because if things are not working for the parents, they run to the grandparents, they go to the other relatives and have access to them and be helped so that they can grow up. So this is very good, and bravo to the team at SACCAR for doing this.
Thank you. Very powerful message there from Solomon Mondlane on the launch of the South African Coalition for Child Access Rights. And if you are an organization, an individual, or a group and you want to join SACCAR, please send an email to info@childalienationsA.co.za. I see the message that we were reading earlier. The person has completed their message, Solomon. Let's have a quick look at that before we start saying goodbye to you. My 7-year-old son as a clear sign of the alienation taking place. So we asked the family advocate how they can overlook this lack of memory by my 7-year-old son as a clear sign of the alienation taking place. Now that makes sense. The lack of memory is evidence of the alienation. My son last said that he wants to change his surname, and we have that call on record where his mother's husband tells him to say that he will be changing his surname. The pain of it all and ignoring by the family advocate leaves us wondering if the system will ever be equitable. And that comment from Zane. Thank you very much for sharing your story with us, Zane. Very painful situation. And I would agree, wouldn't you, Solomon, that if a 7-year-old in a couple of months says, I've got no recollection of my father, to the family advocate, that is prima facie evidence of alienation. It's evidence of emotional and psychological abuse. That child needs therapy. There needs to be reunification therapy to mend the relationship.
I will agree. That's why I said in every case the stories are different, because this is a 7-year-old. Imagine my son was 5, but he could remember when he met the social workers. He remember that he was told that I'm a stepfather. He said, "No, that's my father. I want to see him." So he was 5. So after 3 years, he could still remember that he is having a father. He couldn't understand that the mother is passed on. But this is what happened to a child. I'm sorry for Zain of what is happening. The family advocate is also amongst the web of corruption. I was there to see the chief family advocate. The first thing after she meeting me, she went to meet the same people who are dealing with my case. They told her what to do with me. And she came up to say, you must go for psychological evaluation. Without setting a reason, they want something, they will hang on to say, we're not going to give him his children. I'm staying with my children here, other children from my other relationship. No one have evaluated me. Why are they not taking these children? So they always want something to protect themselves. I'm sorry we're going through that, but this is a fight to engage on.
Absolutely. And while we're trying to get hold of Kirsten, I understand he's having network issues. Let's take a comment, and I believe this is from Shada Mal. We read it earlier on, but now we know who it's from. It's appalling that social workers can state they don't have the experience in dealing with alienation and refuse to address their reports or lack of it. Now, that immediately tells us that there's an opportunity to educate social workers about alienation. And of course, the South African Coalition for Child Access Rights is very willing to work with social workers who need that education based on the experience that we have as a coalition. To continue the comment, now I must take that family advocate report to the High Court and argue it there with very little chance to get the High Court to accept our argument over their family advocate's report. It's a very common problem that parents are experiencing. But again, SACCAR is open to working with social workers, the family advocates, as well as the courts to share our experience of what's happening on the ground, what child alienation is, what the impact is on children, and how it needs to be addressed. So I see we're still having some difficulty getting hold of Kirsten, but I think what we'll do, Carmen, if that's okay with you, is to bring you in as our next interviewee to talk about some of the issues that we've discussed with Solomon, but also your perspective on child alienation. I have interviewed Carmen previously. I know it will be a very interesting interview, but I want to say thank you very much to Solomon Mondlane for joining us today on the launch of SACCAR. A very difficult issue to talk about alienation. It's painful. It takes courage. But of course, at the center of it all is the best interest of the children. And so we welcome your organization, Solomon, as part of the SACCAR coalition, and we look forward to working together for the best interests of the children in our country.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. My last message is my appeal on SACCAR Facebook page to say, Minister Lindiwe Zulu, shut down CMR. Shut down that Dutch Reformed Church NPO. It has done so much damage in our country. Shut it down. It needs to be closed. Thank you.
Well, you've heard that message there from Solomon Mondlane, coming from a position of experience and expertise. And we say thank you to him for joining us today. And of course, he'll be watching the rest of the launch of SACCAR on our Facebook group. And let us introduce another member of SACCAR into the conversation, Carmen Moki. Welcome again, Carmen. It's lovely to see you, and for you to be a part of the launch of the coalition is certainly very important. You're a law student. You've got a bursary from the Rebecca Reeva Steenkamp Foundation, very significant. And of course, you stand against the abuse of children, and in particular, the child access rights of children and the implications of mental health. So thank you for joining us, stepping in there for Kirsten, who's having some data issues. Do you want to comment first, Carmen, on any of the points that Solomon had raised in his interview?
Absolutely, Shadna. One thing that he shared in his primary school education is that instinctively a child loves both parents. And he mentioned the family tree. And to me, as well as a caring and loving mother, the family tree is very important in your legacy, especially in customary law, which is now recognized in South Africa. Previously, in the times of apartheid, which I did experience as a young child, was absolutely disgusting. The justice system had one winner and one loser in a case. And still today, you know, there's always the wagering, the weights going up and the heavy laden, and who will the winner be and who will the loser be. But the true purport and spirit of our South African Constitution that we, the people, put together is to promote the spirit of equality and Ubuntu. And by nailing one parent to a cross and forcing them into psychological evaluations and expensive legal excursions, consulting highly qualified people who are demanding as much as 4,500 rand per hour to try to have your children, it's very clear to me that in the South African justice system, children have become a commodity to certain service providers and even possibly our own state.
This is
I
such an
question
important
how
point you've
effective.
raised there, Carmen. Can I ask you to just pause because you've raised such important points there in relation to the Constitution, the right to equality, the spirit of Ubuntu, the adversarial nature of the legal system. Tell us, in your view, how the adversarial system in family law violates two human rights. Firstly, the rights of the child caught in the center, and secondly, the rights of the targeted, alienated victim parent. How are those rights violated in terms of the Constitution?
Absolutely. Personally, one of the rights that exists is the right to parental care. The state, by letting you go for forced psychological evaluations so that you can have a family advocate report and stand in a high court to fight for your children, abuses you as a citizen of this country psychologically and financially. The second point I want to tell you is in the Constitution, it is written that children have the right to access to parental care. A social worker, a family advocate, they are not the parent of the child. And there's a lot of confusion going on for parents in South Africa right now, and a lot of embarrassment. And people are staying in isolation by not coming out and talking about their experiences of the South African family court. You do not have to be chosen above somebody else. Nelson Mandela made it very clear that we are all equal in South Africa. Why must a child have to choose between two parents?
Well, that's a very important point. Carmen, let's talk about access to justice. I mean, you've raised the issue of the costs that are involved in trying to exercise your right as a parent to your child. What happens to people who, and that's the majority of our country, who can't afford those kinds of costs, whether it's social workers, psychologists, lawyers, the entire system? What happens to them? Do they have any rights? Are they experiencing some form of legal apartheid?
I firmly believe that you are a victim of the apartheid laws of South Africa if you are being refused access to your children. If you are a kind and loving, caring parent and just going through a standard divorce, or if you are going through the separation with your partner, their ego is not more important than your ego. Their role in your child's life is not more important than your role in your child's life. Firmly, I believe that the effectiveness of the Office of the Family Advocate leaves me wondering, because the Office of the Family Advocate has not been tested by our constitutional acts. And here I refer to the Administration Act, as well as the Promotion of Equality Act, the PAPUDA Act. If you test the family advocates by that act, you will end up most likely shutting down their office, because they are not following the concept of Ubuntu and equality in the family advocate reports. In actual fact, parents are being forced to pay for psychologists so that they can have a piece of paper to say that they are safe among their children. And then they have to take that piece of paper to an attorney who's going to charge them 3,500, 4,000 Rand an hour so that they can finally get a court date to stand in front of a judge to say, yes, you can be a parent. Where have you ever heard of that being something that any person on this planet should have to do? It's disgusting. I really believe that the state of South Africa is monetizing the complete breakdown of our families in the courts.
That's a very important point there, Carmen. I'm going to ask you to pause. The state of South Africa is monetizing the rights of a parent to their child. It's such an important point. Let's take a couple of comments here, Carmen. Let's see. Here's a comment here. Judges and magistrates also need training to understand hostile, aggressive parenting and parental alienation. And let's try and raise that one with Professor Cooper, who will be on the live stream at 6:10. Carmen, of course, will be introducing him, but I agree. Hostile, aggressive parenting and parental alienation needs proper understanding, needs training, and of course, a willingness by the legal system to undergo that kind of training to better be able to protect the rights of the child. And of course, as SACCAR, we make ourselves available to facilitate that type of training with our judges and magistrates. A comment here from Zain Truk, I think it is. This is a great stream. Thank you, Shabnam and Solomon. So that was earlier on. Here's another comment for Solomon. Hi, Solomon, my good friend. So proud of how hard you fight for equal rights. I'm an alienated grandparent. I haven't seen my grandkids for over a year because of corrupt social workers from SAVF in Pietermaritzburg and inverted commas foster parents. They made up false allegations to further block contact and break the bond. The one foster parent was calling for a child, in brackets, adoption under foster care process, and hashtags child trafficking, child abuse, and the other wanted the child for the SACCAR money. And I think that's all I can read from that comment. It seems to continue here. I initiated the High Court battle after my children's mother infringed on the High Court divorce order and my parental rights. I used pro bono services. During the first High Court appearance, the judge dismissed the urgency and awarded costs to my children's mother. It was at that point that I lost all faith in the courts. Carmen, would you like to comment on this particular case?
So first and foremost, let's go back to one of the things I've mentioned, and that was financial abuse. Are you, as a parent, anonymous? I just want to say thank you for going to the High Court to fight for your child. But I also want to let you know that cost orders is a lovely gambit that they throw around in High Court area. And I personally believe that we need the courts to take a more purposive approach to the court's processes and decision making. And I reflect on many cases we've had before in our South African courts. Much lenience has been given to various people, even people in the most horrendous of industries have got respect now to continue with their daily reprieve. However, it's a crime for you to want to be a parent in South Africa. And I bring back the notion that child abuse is a crime, and parental alienation of a child, to rip a child from their most loving parents, is child abuse. This is against our constitutional values, and this should be addressed in the parliament. This should be criminalized, and the action of removing a parent from a child's life should become a statutory offense.
Well, there certainly doesn't seem to be any other way. And we'll talk about mediation in a bit, Carmen. Continued from my previous message about the High Court, the children were taken to another province without my knowledge, 400 kilometers away, very common. In fact, we know of stakeholders who aid and abet these types of relocations without the necessary consultation between both parents. And this, of course, sets up the legal battle. And so certainly there need to be consequences for those allies who work together to facilitate this kind of illegal relocation. And a comment from Anonymous, it backfired, Carmen. Unfortunately, going to High Court was not purposeful at all. Assuming, Carmen, that people need to go to court because they're not aware of how to sit down together and draft a parenting agreement, they're not aware of mediation and arbitration, why would they go to High Court instead of going to the Children's Court? Talk to us about that.
So I actually brought an application to the Children's Courts for children to get into therapy in accordance to recommendations from professionals. And the Children's Court said, sorry, this is a High Court matter. I don't want to touch it. So the High Court is supposed to be the guardian of all the children in South Africa. But is it really? Is it really the guardian of South Africa if it's organizing cost orders and it's allowing one parent to win above the other parent? If I was a judge today, I would have a purposive approach and I would promote both parents to go for parental courses so they can understand what child abuse is. There are so many ways to abuse a child that you need to know, are you abusing your child by keeping them away from their kind and loving other parents? This has got nothing to do with an object that you have. A child is not a puppy that you can keep and then do with it what you please. You have to leave a legacy for your child. You have all your ancestral knowledge that you bring forth into your child's future legacy. And that is breaking down families. The High Court, I firmly believe, needs to reassess its approach to such applications and divorces.
Let's take a couple of more comments there, Carmen. Yes, but why is parental alienation not recognized by the courts? They say the social workers don't have experience in parental alienation. What nonsense. I have discovered over the last couple of months that increasingly courts are now aware of what parental alienation is. In a number of cases that I've consulted on, the party that brings their matter through says that the court is talking about parental alienation now. So we seem to have stepped forward, at least in terms of awareness of what parental alienation is. In terms of our magistrates, in terms of our judges, granted, that's not all of them. Granted, there are many, many flaws in the system. But certainly people are reporting that there is a greater awareness of the harms of parental alienation vis-a-vis the mental health of the child and the right to equality of the parents. Another comment here. I completely agree with Carmen on the monetizing point. If financial gain is removed from cases involving children, then the room for abuse will also be removed. Comment there, Carmen.
Well, Shabnam, I think you're the better party to speak on mediation. Mediation is a different process. And let me just reflect on something now. 20 years ago, if you were doing something in the media and you were filming something, you would probably have a helicopter and you would have a cameraman. And those two persons, the pilots of the helicopter and the cameraman, would get a salary. This is now 2021. What do we do now? We have a drone. Those two people have lost their purpose. And this is something that I believe various members are holding on to. They don't want to lose their purpose. They don't want to lose their income. They don't want to be replaced by the new ways of society, 2021. Mediation is a fantastic process. I love it. I've spent time with mediators at the courts myself. And I must tell you, to sit down with the other parents and communicate, how are you going to be the number one support system together for the child that you have conceived? Personally, I believe a parenting plan should be published the same time a child receives its birth certificate. Having a parenting plan drafted when a child is in the middle of a divorce or a separation is not the best time to do it. If you are currently facing a divorce and you are up against a very highly conflictive personality type, Zane, Solomon, Oric, Gary, Graham, Anonymous, I just want to let you know, you're not going to win much in the South African courts right now. The South African courts is just going to throw someone a cost order and give someone more custody or more parental rights than the other. I believe the South African courts, in terms of children's rights to parental care, still is supported by the old apartheid ways of South Africa. Right now, we need to encourage mediation. And it's very difficult because you do have some personality types that only serve their ego or their narcissism. And there's much talk on narcissistic people out there, and which I believe Prof. Satz Cooper will give us more information on. But right now, my concern is the children. This child is taught to hate 50% of who created them. That's horrible. This child thinks that they have been abandoned by their parents and they're worthless inside. And this child is often manipulated and controlled by a very controlling parent, for which I do tell every parent out there and every child watching this, if your parents went through a divorce, if you're getting spun some crazy story like your parent tried to kill you, or whatever the story might be of the one controlling parent keeping you from the other parent, please, there is case law that you can look for. You can see if your parent really tried to kill you. The delusions of the controlling parents need to have a roadmap to make their story sound, and they don't. And just sending one parent for a psychological evaluation is not embracing equality. You need both parents to go. In fact, let the whole family go. That's why I love Business Rescue, because you can call a creditors meeting and you can bring out a proper plan. And you need the same in mediation. You need a family meeting and you need to bring out a proper plan. How are you going to support that child? Because that's what the evil is out there in the world. The less we can
Absolutely.
support a child, the better the chances are that the child will not be a functional adult one day.
Very important point. I will be talking to Professor Sats Cooper about the impacts of alienation on children. But the point you raised about mediation is such an important one. And now it's compulsory to consider and even attempt mediation before going to the court, which is a step in the right direction. If, of course, you have the personality that is open to constructive discussions, agreement in the best interest of the child. And of course, you raised the point of certain personalities who do suffer from narcissistic personality disorder, and so therefore don't want to discuss, negotiate, agree on an equitable and healthy parenting plan, which of course paves the way for litigation, which is stressful, first of all, for the child and the parents. It's lengthy, given the overburden on our legal system. And of course, it's costly. So if you can't afford the cost involved, you're going to be at the mercy of a system that's going to make a decision for you. You're not going to be able to make a decision together as parents who understand your child and come up with an agreement that is equitable, healthy, and fair. So these are the chances you're taking when you enter the litigation space. Of course, if you are working with attorneys, our advice to you as SACCAR is to put mediation on the table first. Couple of comments here, Carmen. The only reason I went to High Court, this is anonymous again, is because the Children's Court said that I must go and fight this at the court where the children moved to, which was impossible. I argued that their relocation was a breach of the divorce order and my parental rights, which had been ignored by the High Court. Such an important point there raised by Anonymous, that parents need to go and fight where the child was essentially kidnapped to by a relocation that the other parent didn't agree to. And now this parent, the targeted parent, has now got to go to that province. It's an impossible situation, especially given the socioeconomic situation of people in our country post-lockdown, where even more people have lost their jobs. People don't have the money to travel to another province, which is why the online system of adjudicating matters that came into effect post-lockdown is something that needs to continue to protect the rights of the child. And the second comment here, also by Anonymous, in our case, we were told by the family advocate that their social workers have no experience. So they could be aware, but nothing is done about the alienation, no probing, no witnesses. Your child's future in the hands of people who have no experience in such, and they will dictate the future of the child. It's wrong and it's unfair. Another comment here, yes, Carmen, the child is taught to hate and to forget 50% of their genetic makeup. Malignant narcissists are indeed alive and well. And last comment here, we want our child to grow up secure in knowing both parents love him or her and be able to develop healthy relationships later on in life. So we've got about 4 minutes to go before we bring Professor Sats Cooper into the conversation. I know everyone's looking forward to that very, very much. Let's look at a couple of questions that I had actually intended to ask Kesson. Carmen, and I'm sure you'll be able to speak to these as well. How would co-parenting simplify maintenance issues? There's a lot of people that confuse the two and say, well, I'm not getting paid maintenance, so therefore I'm going to not allow access. And it's a very complex issue because obviously the child's needs need to be seen too. But again, given the financial situation in our country, people are losing jobs, they can't afford to pay maintenance. Would co-parenting on a 50-50 basis simplify the issue of maintenance?
Why do you need maintenance if you can have a parenting plan drafted at the birth of the child that you can revise every year? Why does a child need to have maintenance if you have two parents acting responsibly, contributing to the expenses of the child? My next stage is, why is this in the court where you need to pay an attorney so that you can fight over your child? That money needs to go to your child, not to the lawyer, not to funding the courts to look busy. If you want to do something for your child, you will sit down like a responsible adult and agree to a parenting plan and pay towards their school fees. And if you lose your job, I'm sorry. I've been there. I know what it's like to be retrenched in COVID times. Look for another job. Start another business. Whatever can happen to you financially doesn't need to be the burden of your child. Think out of the box, okay? The next thing I want to tell you is that you need to focus on your family and not funding the families of lawyers and funding the families of social workers, because as soon as they've got something on the mental health bill against you, the social worker has to supervise your contact with the child, and that is so abnormal. It's absolutely horrendous. So I just want to say that a parenting plan should be drafted in the beginning, and when you go through a divorce, it should be a clean break. The children should be sorted out. The estate should be sorted out. And most importantly, many other countries, and I believe it's Scandinavia and Sweden and so on, many other countries don't believe in maintenance anymore. The choices you took in your life is the choices that you need to live with. And I feel sorry for many people that disagree with me. I was also a housewife. My husband's not paying me maintenance. Why is it that I need to go to court for maintenance? You go, you find yourself a job, and you provide financially for your family. That's my answer.
Thank you, Carmen. Last two questions for you before we ask you to introduce Professor Cooper. And I must agree with you that parenting plans need to be negotiated, drafted, and possibly made an order of court, even when people begin relationships. Because when you get to the point of separation and divorce, the emotions are running so high that it's a matter of I need to beat the other party at all costs because I'm angry. And who's caught in the middle is that hostage child or children looking at both parents and praying that they find a way to resolve this peacefully. Last two questions for you, Carmen. What is your message to to your children as well as to children who are being emotionally abused through child alienation?
You are a human being with your own thoughts. You can think for yourself. You do not need somebody to control you. You do not need someone to share their psychotic delusion with you. And you know the difference between right and wrong. So just because your parent is possibly not with you today, doesn't mean that your parent doesn't love you. Just because you are fighting a losing battle as a parent and you're paying so much money at the high court, maybe you just need to start your own organization. Get into the media as much as possible. Do what Solomon did. Make your voice heard. Because if Nelson Mandela could bring such positive change to South Africa, why on earth are we being punished today as parents?
Very important point there, Carmen. And what are your thoughts on the launch of SACCAR, the South African Coalition for Child Access Rights?
Ladies and gentlemen, it is time that we all take hands and we stand as we the people, because we are the people, not those that want to line their pockets with procedures that are so mundane and so financially appalling. So please make your voice heard. Don't be ashamed if you're going through parental alienation as a parent or a child. Stand your guns, and whatever you do, leave your legacy to your child, because that is your God-given right and their God-given destiny.
Thank you very much for Carmen Maki, who is an important founding member of the South African Coalition for Child Access Rights, stepping in there for Kesan Raman in a brilliant way, of course. Thank you, Carmen. We're going to ask you now to introduce our keynote guest of honor, Professor Sats Cooper, who's going to be talking to us about the impact of co-parenting versus child alienation. Please, Carmen.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, people of the public, we are now introducing Dr. Professor Sats Cooper, currently Vice President of Information and Communications for International Social Sciences Council. Furthermore, he is the President of the Pan-African Psychology Union. He has served as President and chaired on regulatory board meetings of the HPCSA. He provides knowledgeable information and impacts guidelines to institutions and government policy. He is an international icon in psychology and psychosocial and related matters, a fellow of the British and Irish Psychology Societies. The list goes on. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear what one of the top psychology people, members in society, have to say about parental alienation.
Thank you very much, Carmen Maki, and let's welcome to the launch of the South African Coalition for Child Access Rights, Professor Sats Cooper. Thank you for joining us, Prof.
It's my pleasure to be with you. Today, we ought to be celebrating and paying homage to the thousands of children who took on the military might of the previous regime with their bare hands, armed only with their principles and dreams of a better future. And it is tragic that all around us, children are only seen and heard in the negative, like in the specific matters that SACCAR is dealing with, and which affects a significant percentage of the population, and in particular those who have access to courts. So I share some of the thinking that has been expressed on some of these matters, and I want to just point out that there's a very thin line between love and hate. These are very, very all-consuming emotions and actually states of being when you're in love, and then post the honeymoon and everything else happening in between, things go awry and you're faced with separation or divorce, and then begins the hate. Now, I'm being very simplistic, of course. Very, very many individual cases differ exceedingly. But one of the major problems is that we have an adversarial legal system in our country. So there isn't the opportunity to create a harmonious way of resolution in disputes that ought not to end up in court and ought not to have all those issues that have been raised so far by many of you. But you see, we are a constitutional democracy, and part of that constitution, the Bill of Rights, gives a particular status to different institutions. And unfortunately, our sense of agency has been steadily denuded by mediocrity in leadership, with the result that we tend to rely more and more on our courts. Who says that the person sitting in making that decision is qualified to make decisions where people's relationships, and in this case, where children's growth, development, and entire future matter? I'll be very kind, if we have half of our lawyers who have the interests of what the Children's Act puts out, what our Bill of Rights provision about in all matters concerning the child, and really looking at the situation of the child and having the vision, the foresight, the knowledge about relationships and how people behave when things are good and when things are not so good, then I will shut up, because I think that the difficulty is, one, the adversarial system, and two, the contorted requirements of the Children's Act, which then gets entrusted to an institution called the Family Advocate's Office. And we then have people who lobby particular social workers, particular advocates, particular staff members. Hey, what's new in this country? That's what we all do, right? We end up attempting to look at who knows who, and then we speak to them, and we have specialists in this field, particularly attorneys, and also other professionals like psychologists, who put themselves out as the experts. They can get it done, and then the cost becomes exceedingly high. Why should we end up paying people whose job it is to provide these things, or to have intermediaries engage with the court system? You know, it's like going to the Home Affairs and somebody comes to you, and usually it's somebody with a Pakistani or other accent saying, can I help you? It's going to cost you so much. So we have ended up diminishing what was well intended into a tout system. And earlier, I think Carmen mentioned parenting plans and so on. And really, those parenting plans, sometimes they're drawn up by people who have actually very little clue about the socioeconomic, cultural contexts of that child and of the parents. And coming to psychology, for instance, because a lot of psychologists end up doing work that where they're called to court. I think that for many, especially new psychologists, they look at where is the money. I'm now going to call it as I see it, and I've reached a stage where I think to pussyfoot over some of these issues is not good enough. And I've not been somebody to, not call it as it is. And so I'm not going to do so here. And the consequences, well, they'll be come back, but, I'm a big boy, I can deal with it. So the confusion often is, there's money, and I want to get into that work. Then come the consequences. And I deal with it at a level, I've dealt with it previously in terms of work with children. I stopped that work more than a couple of decades ago because it's very painful work. You with what you do to children, and in home, in the school, in public spaces, and it's gotten worse over time. It does something to you. You cannot remain unaffected by that. So I chose not to do it. In fact, my psychology work probably stopped at that point in terms of direct evaluation, intervention, and so on. But that young person goes in, does a very good piece of work, does a decent evaluation, and then one of the parents says, well, my child has, I'm just going to give you, I'm going to give an amalgam of tales into a couple of case studies so that not one child becomes identified.
Right.
There's something wrong with this child because she tends to fabricate and she makes up stories. And so won't you see her and do some therapy with her and, attempt to solve this problem, says the one parent. And that parent is somebody who, against whose partner there may be an accusation of some kind of untoward involvement, you know. So when that kind of thing happens, it's easy to say, yes, I'll do the evaluation, and then I'll immediately transition to being the therapist. Now, how do you do a separation in terms of what you're going to report to the court as an evaluator versus I'm now a therapist treating the child?
That's such an important point, Prof. If I can just pause you there, what you're referring to is a conflict of interest with the psychologist, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Well, look, it ought not to happen, and all our training programs point that out. But in practice, it happens, and we don't end up asking. One of the game shows said you have 3 choices. You can do 1, 2, or you can call a friend. Nobody calls a peer and asks, by the way, what do I do here? It's only they then start calling the committees and calling the psychological society officers and saying, what do I do when one of the parents raises hell? Now, I pointed out earlier that not every parent is all bad and not every parent is all good. On a bell-shaped curve, we've got a very small percentage of people who are exceedingly bad in the world, doing all sorts of terrible, crazy things. And we hear of it every day. And then on the other side, we've got a very small percentage of saints who do no harm totally. And although all our ethics codes tell us to do no harm, each one of us is flesh and blood. We interact in the real world. We do things. We say harsh words. Everything we do is absolutely perfect. So based on that understanding of what real life is about, we ought to find a different way of doing it. So if there's one important take home for the organization, and that is ensure that professionals don't overservice, don't have conflicts, and ensure that the institutions set up by our constitutional democracy, e.g., family advocates and the beginnings of a children's court, are qualitatively different and keep to what the law intended, rather than the case of, here it's an Afrikaner woman who she gave up everything, became a housewife for years, and the husband is a businessman, and now she's facing a professional's bill, not a lawyer's bill, a professional's bill, psychologist's bill for parenting and other plans and so on. And they charge by the page.
Right.
And she has to get a second mortgage. Now, there's something wrong in the state of Denmark when you do that kind of thing. Why should an ordinary parent go to that extent? And when that happens, the quality of what they're going to give to their children is also going to be impacted. So the only winners are the lawyers and the professionals intervening. The kids, the parents, just out the door. So
absolutely. Prof. Koop, I want to ask you to pause there with those very powerful introductory comments that you've made. I mean, you've got us riveted with your perspective. And of course, Prof. Cooper tells it like it is, as always. And this is not the first time we're having this conversation about child alienation, mental abuse issues with the system. So we're so proud to have him with us. Let's take a couple of comments here from our audience. Access rights and co-parenting must become mandatory the moment a child is born. It must become the law. I absolutely agree with that. And Prof, as I'm going through these comments, if there's anything you want to comment on before I ask you a couple of questions, you're welcome to do that. So that one is about parenting rights becoming mandatory, co-parenting becoming mandatory the moment a child is born, must become the law. Lawyers make money that their businesses sadly mostly don't have the children's best interests at heart. They are ruthless. Children's growth and behavior get stunted. How will they become better parents and better citizens? And then a couple more comments here. Sadly, when extended family perpetually drive wrong role model examples just to annoy, they don't realize the damage that they do. Will they do that to their own children? Important point there. And finally, I think there should be a Hello Peter site with legal implications for defaulting parents. Prof, before we get into any of the questions, I want to ask you any thoughts on the comments from our audience
Well,
here?
look, all of the comments come from lived experiences, clearly, and some of the other pointers, like the Hello Peter, and I think that's why SACCAR is being formed. It's normative now to ensure that both parents have rights, so that the child has full access to both parents. It often becomes quite disruptive for the child, and not disruptive in the 20th century usage of it. It becomes detrimental to that child because she has to leave one parent, go to the other parent, attitude to that, and children are very adaptive. They can do it, but in doing that, there are consequences in terms of what they carry from one household to another, and so on, and the schooling. And often, parents don't live in the same area. So what happens, if they were in love, they're in hate, and then they've separated, and now they have to deal with their children, and the child is going to a very decent school, but the other parent is far away. So, and that's a reality. So there's technical, logistical issues, and it ought not to be. Well, it's 50-50. I think we need to look at what is appropriate for that child or children, because often they're more, and for the parents. And rather than impose a formulaic intervention, which actually may not make sense, one needs to apply one's mind to a resolution that helps them to deal with their issues, so that you don't create what all of you have been raising in social media and everywhere else, and the advocacy for parental alienation syndrome, etc., happens. Now, we should be also aware that whether we like it or not, most of the parents who are articulate on this are middle-class parents. But our middle class is a tiny fraction of our society. The bulk of our parents don't have that. So whilst I laughed and recognized that extended family kind of thing, on the other hand, for the majority of our people out there, and for the children, they brought up in a communal context. So if the granny weren't there, that child will be rudderless, so it's somebody's granny who's bringing up maybe a brood of children because of delinquent parents, and it's adults misbehaving that cause children to learn bad behaviors, to learn to become the future abusers, to learn to disrespect self and then the other, and to diminish the role of women in their lives, particularly if they look for the macho guy, you know, flashy and able to solve all the world's problems. And he's faced with a Shabnam. He's faced with somebody who is looking after him, who he begins to develop an attitude dangerous for his upbringing, and that begins part of the cycle of the violence and the trauma that we are seeing out there. So please go on. I've gone into a long wind.
Oh, that's exactly what we're talking about, Prof. You're on the point there, that we're trying to deal with the and nurture the mental health of children so that cycles don't repeat themselves. On the issue of co-parenting, what we are proposing at SACCAR is that the starting point should be 50-50. And the reason we do that is because our institutions don't respect the right to equality. So there is a highly skewed agreements and plans and decisions are made. So what we're saying to these stakeholders, your starting position should be 50-50. This is presuming mediation does not work, which is, of course, the first thing that parents should strive to achieve, parenting plan through mediation. But if you're going through the legal process and the family law system, the starting point should be 50-50. And then the factors of logistics, socioeconomic conditions, etc., all get factored in. In fact, Prof, when I raised a query with the Family Advocates Office here in KwaZulu-Natal, do you have any statistics of how many times you've made a decision for co-parenting on the basis of 50-50? They have no stats. They have no stats. So we have a serious problem in our country where there's a lack of transparency. There's no respect for the right to equality. And this is, in my view, creating a more hostile and volatile situation for the children, but also between parents. And it contextualizes this gender-based violence issue that we're facing in our country. In fact, it is fostering it.
So in that case, it's not a file missing, but it's just not keeping stats. And I'm pretty certain, I'm not going to stereotype it, but I think that quite a few of the staffers are likely to be women. But then you need to also look at how do they confront their own issues of being women in society that are so degraded, where their own sense of their rights and how they deal in their own contexts happen in the way that it happens. So, you know, I think we need to acknowledge that there's victims. You can turn that around, and most South African society are victims of one kind or another. Even some of us, when we perpetrate certain things, because our victimology has played certain roles to shape how we view the world and how we engage in it. And a couple of weeks ago, I did a session with mainly psychologists on ethics in and human rights in a democratic era. And I presented something to them which most people are unaware of, and that is that apartheid was there, and yes, it oppressed blacks and did all sorts of terrible things, but there were lots of whites impacted by that, who are living and presented the case of military, where this particular colonel, Levine, Aubrey Levine, created a training program to change young military conscripts' behavior. If he found that he thought or somebody decided that this was a hippie, or maybe smoking dacha, or listening to certain music they shouldn't be listening to, or they were fluid with their gender position, and they may be the M word, you know, then they sent them to Kreerswald on the border of on the shores of the Limpopo River. It doesn't exist anymore, but a complete program to re-engineer them. And this guy escaped. He ran away to Canada during the TRC hearing, so he didn't have to answer. But karma is a terrible thing. He was charged in Canada eventually for fondling male patients. You know, so it's that kind of stuff that we have in our society. And
Right.
most of us are wounded by what has happened. And there's no attempt to create any holding environment, to create any understanding, let alone intervention. And so what do you think happens in our entities staffed by the walking wounded?
Right.
And in our law enforcement and other agencies, you have these walking wounded. I don't like to psychologize and people, but we've clearly reached the stage where we are a sick society. We cannot use other South African secularism is true. We are totally sick, we weird, and we don't deal with our issues. We tend to overlook them, or we tend to make it somebody else's problem. This is our problem, even though it impacts on middle class, more able parents right now, but it impacts on all our children. And what we do to our children is utterly important in how we resolve the conflicts, the insecurities, and the uncertainties in our society. Our children have to be put first, but in a terribly fractured way. What we've done to our children is we have abused them at all levels, at the public policy level, at the job level, at the level where we blame them for what they confront, which we created, and we stand in the way often of our children advancing because we don't want to open up things. You know, trade unions do that. Certain groups of professions do that. So how will our children get into those areas, you know, unless they've got a contact or two and they can do a BEE or other transaction and quickly move to the top, or you know somebody in court and you're able to get your matter heard very quickly. So that corruption is within us, and all of us look at how do we cut a corner to get there. And if you do it faithfully and wait in line, you're waiting forever and a day. So often I can't blame people for wanting to look at a quick fix, a way out of it, because the system is totally corrupted and corrupting. And our children bear the brunt of all of that is totally corrosive.
Complex and layered situation. They're contextualizing, the psychosocial circumstances of South Africans from apartheid into now, still carrying that pain forward into different positions, including those responsible to protect the mental health of children and by extension, their parents and families. Comment here, the courts profit from the process of alienation. Family Advocate is an overly celebrated organization. Granted, they get it right sometimes, but we should never forget that they are capable of monumental failures. There needs to be an established process for recourse to these failures. Very important point there. The one thing that I cannot understand is how the courts expect us as human beings to keep emotion out of it all. It's impossible. No father or mother can be devoid of emotion when significant skullduggery is taking place that is overlooked. Emotion is what makes us human. And such an excellent point they raised for a point that you just made, Doc. In my introduction to the launch, I shared a very commonly held viewpoint by alienated children and families for decades. And that is that child alienation is overlooked as a severe form of emotional, mental, and psychological abuse and neglect. Would you agree? And why do you think that is the status quo? Why don't we see alienation as psychological abuse?
Well, look, I think that because we're facing so many problems, to have another syndromal pattern be dealt with at the level we're talking about just becomes too much for all sorts of entities out there. The fact of the matter is, in this country, our children are alienated fairly quickly after birth in so many ways, from parents, from love, from appropriate caring, from compassion. Essential ingredients for, caring, compassion, and consideration for self and others. Those C's are vital in the nurturing of a future responsible prepubescent, then teenager, then youth, then adult, and so on. But we don't have that. So mostly we have the example of what happened to us. We look across the street, we look across the corridor and think, the Mohammeds live so very well. But we, the Kumalos, have all these problems. But you don't go into the Mohammed's home to look at what happens there. All of us face problems. There's no perfect family situation. Anybody who believes that, that there's perfection, there's such a loving couple, there's such a good family, etc., you seeing the one side. The other side, you don't see. It's, the dark side of the moon. So all of us, bar none, have that. And very few have that idyllic place that the rest of us want to aspire to. But when it happens, and there's so few and far between in terms of examples, we ought to cherish those examples and allow them to be exemplified. But the serious destructive value of our terrible education system. That education system where Vervoet failed, but we've succeeded in democracy in dumbing down everything. There hasn't been that quest to inquire, to look around and find novel answers to terrible problems that have been besetting us for so long. And if we can't get simple things right, how are we going to get it right if our education system doesn't underpin it? So there's so many areas of challenge, grave challenge in this society, and only a few of us can afford to send our children to some of those schools. And then when they go to those schools, they're confronted with what happens in the Emalahleni Technical High School. Parents taking sides, parents behaving very badly, or we have the ridiculous protest by the Auditor General at Cornwall Girls' School, I think it was, in Irene, because of what they did to the children, hair and whatever else, the Juleka Patel story all over again. If our leaders, key national figures, are forced to protest, what does it say about our system? So we've got a system that on the books looks wonderful. In practice, it's been eroded, and the people who are responsible for it have actually allowed that deterioration.
Absolutely. Such an important point there, the system and what we've allowed to continue, because certainly in terms of psychology and in terms of the legal system and in terms of what defines child abuse, child alienation clearly fits under psychological, mental, and emotional abuse and needs to be treated as such. In fact, there are therapists who say it is a hostage situation, it's a war situation for the child. The child needs to be removed as a matter of urgency and be given the therapy that they need and reunification therapy between them and the targeted parent. A comment here, lawyers can play such a constructive role if they choose, otherwise ask them if they would do that to their own children. Again, it boils down to what marriage advice parents and extended family give children. Jan Talyard says, I can back that the system is corrupted, an evil system connected to the NGK. I'm not sure what the NGK is. Prof, I'm not sure if you're aware.
Yes, the Nederduitse Gereformeerde Kerk, the Dutch Reformed Church. Yeah, I mean, look.
All right. Well, certainly some
it's our
serious issues
legacy,
here.
and it's
Yes.
impacted on us. And we can't look at it as them and us and so on and perpetuate the gaps that exist. This is what we have, warts and all, and we need to deal with it together. We cannot blame anybody else because we've inherited such a system, and the mediocre leadership that we have all around us in all spheres, to name them, they are there, have tended to dumb us down into being compliant individuals that just become complacent. We don't question. That agency that happened in June 16th. So I think our children need to be playing a different role, but they need to overcome us as adults who have kept them back and who have subjected them to some of the trauma that you've eloquently pointed out. And not only in the parenting and the divorce context, but in the bigger context as well. So for SACCAR, I think that needs to be something that you look to in terms of advocacy.
Important point there by Prof. Cooper. Comment from Facebook user, divorced parents can alienate children from maternal and paternal contact, but it's okay for boyfriends and girlfriends to have the contact. Then you've got to deal with bullying and threats from such persons. They pay no maintenance. They've got no sincere interest in the child's best interest. There should be laws to punish this behavior. And we know that can be very problematic and cause further issues in an already high conflict situation. Here's another comment here. Exactly what I went through. He said, so many lies about me and we don't know each other. My 3 children witnessed it and fled that environment. 2 children are still with me and refuse to go back to that environment. The family advocate has ignored the violent environment and recommends that the little one remain in the environment to the detriment of the 3 children's long-term relationship. Children from troubled homes look for an escape. They grab the first boy and girl just to escape. They use kids to anchor partners without having the chance to deal with their trauma. They perpetuate a vicious cycle. Another comment here before my next question for Prof. Sats Cooper. The divorce court in South Africa is against equality for all. Very important points raised there in terms of what children tend to do to deal with the trauma that they're experiencing. Prof, what are the signs to look out for, whether you're, an educator, a parent, a peer of this child, a good member of the community who cares about children, or one of the professionals involved? What are the signs to look out for when a child is experiencing a form of child alienation abuse? And of course, the signs you would see in an introverted child may be very different to a child who's extroverted and everything seems to be fine. But what are these children experiencing and what does that do to their healthy development?
Well, look, I think that the signs that we need to watch for is anything unusual, but we must have a before and after picture. The child being introverted or being totally extroverted, from the one to the other, the acting out behavior, the totally going inside oneself and avoidance behavior, doing things to oneself or doing things to another, and generally the feeling of unease and lack of appetite or overeating. So it's a range, and these change according to the individual. Somebody who looks bubbly underneath can be experiencing the worst cries of trauma that they're trying to mask by being bubbly. You know, the wounds are so ugly that they feel, I'd rather show this side. And so I think it's knowing that, you know, the caretakers in the environment, parents, importantly, other you know, grandparents, aunts, uncles who are in the family situation or who know the child, teachers, of course, and unfortunately our teachers are overstressed. They have to deal with so many issues. I mean, besides the incompetency of many governmental departments that they have to deal with, they have to deal in the majority of schools in this country with classes that are horrendously high, 40 to 50 children in a class. And how can you teach, you know? And we've changed the language. We've got nice language, educator, learner, and so on. But simply put, that child is not going to in such a huge class. And programs ought to have to ameliorate that don't happen. So I think what we should be doing is we need to have in each school or in a clutch of schools the appropriate social worker, counselor kind of person who really, this mustn't be a job. This must be a calling. They must love to do this. They must love children. They need to be screened appropriately to be able to be trained to deal with that. And there are many people out there who will fit the bill, not the ones who end up going into some of these professions because they don't have what it takes. In our police, in our military, there's all sorts of adverts going around, and wounded people are going to be recruited with issues that come from their upbringing, their home, their school, their other contexts. They're going to bring it into their training environment. They're going to be trained by incompetent and half-competent people. I'm just being simplistic here, but I think the excellent ones get drowned out by the incompetent ones, and a recipe for disaster. So I'm afraid I can't give you much good news about what we should be doing. The tasks are enormous, but don't adopt a rose-colored view of the world. The world is dangerous, it is terrible and deteriorating at a fast rate. So if we know that, we're better prepared to deal with it rather than perpetuate the denialism that we've seen for too long, and particularly when we should be dealing better with our children, we continue to deny them and we continue to stunt their growth in so many ways.
Absolutely agree with you. Here's a comment, Facebook user. Salam Palesa, congratulations on this launch. Very informative session. Carmen, your knowledge of these topics show how passionate you are about this cause. Thank you, Doctor, on shining the torch on the system we've inherited. For SACCAR, I see a lot of work ahead. I'm watching as an alienated grandmother. I often think about how much of a loss it is for an affected child. Certainly, alienated grandparents are going through enormous trauma, missing out on the memories and the milestones of this grandchild that they love very, very much. And here's another comment here. Dr. Satz, there should be a school curriculum. Relationships break everything one can build over time. Our kids need to be educated on partner selection and compatibility. Note the teen suicide cases and adult suicides when there's trouble in this regard. I mean, that's an important point, Doc. I mean, how does, what type of personalities would do alienation? How do you know you're getting into this relationship with this person that they're not going to end up alienating you from your child when things don't work out? What are the signs to look out for in a partner who might turn out to be an alienator?
Look, there aren't really signs. I mean, if you speak to parents who've been in that situation. They'll try to find things, but it was hunky-dory at that time. The problem is, schooling don't expose to the biggest thing we do, and that is we relate to one another. We're not enabled to become effective in relationships, whether they are of the intimate or just the friend or collegial or other relationship, you know. And often we see this in social media, particularly during this pandemic, all the outpourings. It bursts out into counterculture stuff. It bursts out into saying, well, you're white and you are black and whatever and whatever and whatever, because we badly brought up, we badly educated. We need to change our educational system. We've got something there called life skills, life orientation, a crock of things joined together. We're not orienting our kids to the reality of the world. Today, in some of the speeches, they're still talking about job creation. We know that's not going to happen. The jobs are not there. They're diminishing. Artificial intelligence, mechanization, technology is taking over. So enable our kids to have a rounded, fuller education so that they can create sustenance for themselves. Otherwise, they're going to be dependent and waiting. I want a job. I need a job. I'm looking for a job, because where foot failed, our democracy has succeeded. So I think we need to advocate for a different way that we teach, how we learn. Our kids from an early age blot up everything. They're like old blotters. I mean, some of you, unless you're older, you don't know the blotters that used to be there when you wrote with a pen and ink, right? But our children are sponges. They learn through all their senses. If children did not witness walking, witness talk, they won't be able to talk. So we shape our children, we socialize, we educate them, for heaven's sake. If we've got parents who themselves need education and growing up, imagine what those children are facing.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? Some of the research that's out there in terms of personality types that are more likely to alienate a child, bring up narcissism as a personality trait, borderline personalities, etc. When that parent is willing to change, then there may be options out there for them to re-educate or unlearn and relearn those behaviors. But many people either don't accept that they have that issue or don't want to change. And of course, it's the child that suffers in those types of situations. Here's a comment here for grandparents. There is a section 23 where you can get a right to your grandchildren. Another comment, history of the parents, their moral values are some indication of troubled partners. They don't have a decent moral compass. Affairs and alcohol abuse, they've been brought up with some of that behavior and they think that's acceptable. They continue with the same behavior without any conscience. Prof, by definition, child-parent alienation is a severe form of domestic violence. It falls under psychological abuse. And that leaves, I just want to turn the focus from the children to the parents for a bit here. It leaves targeted parents in deep-seated trauma. How should this abuse be addressed, this emotional trauma be addressed? Is there any systemic opportunity that is there to assist these parents going through this trauma who can't afford to go to a psychologist, heaven forbid, and are walking around wounded, can't function normally in relationships, struggle at work, have no interest in being an active citizen because all you're focused on is this domestic violence of being separated from your child?
Well, look, I'm a big believer, and I've seen it work in various contexts here and elsewhere in the world. Self-help groups play a remarkable role. The problem is you're dealing often with a mother who is on the receiving end of this alienation, and she's the butt of everything that is bad, and the child grows up in that environment. So if mothers were to engage with other mothers who've experienced similar things, or who may be able to assist them in some way, there's no shame in seeking that. And I think that those kinds of self-help groups can work wonders. Obviously, sometimes there may need to be some professional intervention, but if it's confidential enough and the rules are very, very clear in the group, I think that group work is wonderful. The world's largest intervention entity is Alcoholics Anonymous. You get them all over the world, right? Except for certain countries that don't, pretend that booze doesn't happen in those countries, or the booze is outlawed, but the boozing happens behind closed doors if they can smuggle it in and so on. What happens in Alcoholics Anonymous is that persons who have been alcoholics themselves, and they never say, I was an alcoholic. They say, I'm recovering. They always say, I'm recovering, because they know the temptations, they know what happens if one little slip occurs. They're also very supportive, and they'll call on you. And if Shabnam is missing from that session on Wednesday afternoon, they'll come knocking on the door and say, what happened? Were you in an accident? Did you, were you late from work, etc., etc., etc. So they always there. Now, for the alcoholic that doesn't want that, he will not benefit. But I think a lot of people want to get help, and the authentication by others who have experienced it works wonders, because as a professional can give a particular take on it, but if you've not really experienced what that person has been going through, and your gestures, even if you don't say anything, a little lifting of the eyebrow, or your eyes dilating, will send a message to the person impacted. Now, I want to advocate that people out there, others who are impacted by this, should form a small support group of others, and then seek other help from the various entities that provide counseling on a free basis, or that can provide it on a reduced basis.
Oh, that's a very important practical suggestion. There's support groups for parents who are going through this kind of trauma. Prof, we're battling a little bit with your internet connection there. Just to mention that a couple of years ago, research was done into the statistics on who gets primary care, which SACCAR believes is a very unhealthy situation and set up to give one parent primary care and to give the other one visitation rights, or what we now call access. It creates a situation for lifelong conflict and disaster, because it's highly competitive and has this power dynamic. But when the research was done a couple of years ago, and I believe this was featured on Carte Blanche, in 80% of cases, primary care was given to the mom, not to the dad. And so we have a very skewed system in terms of fathers' rights. And then fathers who desperately want to be involved in their children's lives are accused of being deadbeat fathers, when sometimes they give up because they're not seen as equal of a parent as the mother is, which is, of course,
Sure.
creating all sorts of issues in societies, in our communities, and for that child who now does not see the father as equal to the mother. But as SACCAR, what we're saying is that alienators, even though they may be a gender dynamic, we believe that alienators have a personality challenge. That's where it's coming from rather than their gender. And so we're prepared to work with parents, whether they're mothers or fathers, in the best interest of the children. A comment here, Saka, thank you for this breakthrough moment in history. South African legislature needs to develop the law. That's a very important comment there. Prof,
May
when
I just
parents...
say,
Yes, please.
finish that one? Yeah, go ahead.
No, yes, please.
You know, in my own experience, and some of the cases I'm dealing with now, they are very powerful people because they have the money. And it's usually men, they have the money. Some are actually lawyers, and they know the system. They know the legal system, and the legal system knows them. They know who to get. They get a hit man or a hit woman as their specialist to come and show the court how terrible this woman is. She's suffering from all sorts of craziness that if the court even thinks of granting her more than maybe one supervised visit per month, this child will be terribly impacted, and yet no objective assessment is done. I think what we need to have is we need to have a panel of these specialists, whether they're medical, whether they're psychological, whether they're social worker or others. You know, they could be pastoral, they could be priests. We need to have a panel, and that panel should be the one to be used by the court to say, I'm asking Sats Cooper to deal with X. So you're not paid by one side or the other, because what almost invariably happens when you are briefed by an attorney, the payer calls the tune. And I've seen that time and again, and however much some dear colleagues and friends of mine try to justify it, you know they've been hired as a hit person, and that's not all. I also want to point out that while the courts give, custody rights to mothers, and that's been raised, particularly by in that famous case where this guy was the father. I forget the case now, but he was a father, and he played no role in the relationship after the mother gave birth. And he went to court, and eventually, I come from a situation where my father was a very powerful man. My mother was also powerful, but she was a teacher, and he knew the system. So when they had their separation, I was prepubescent. But the kinds of things that would be said directly and indirectly were clearly intended to alienate us, the children, from my mother, because she was bad, she was terrible, she was all these things. And so it was a carrot and egg kind of thing. And for, you are 11 years old, you are 5 years old, you are 9 years old, and you're experiencing that, and you know that this man is powerful, he's revered in the community, he can get things done, and she's not there anymore. So if you show any feelings, it's terrible, But fortunately, we had a decently rounded education, and in the place we lived in, we interacted with all sorts of different kids. And I'm a living example of you can overcome all of these things. It doesn't have to affect you. Sometimes professionals can perpetuate this cycle because, you know, I'll use another example. If you were to listen to, if you were to read some of the affidavits in court cases brought by groups of psychologists against other psychologists or against the Professional Board for Psychology, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Afrikaners as a group had certain kinds of syndromes overrepresented, you know. So they would say, I'm dealing with so-and-so who's X. I'm not going to give you any diagnostic there, but they saw that person as a child, and still seeing them as a teenager and still seeing them as an adult, then your therapy is ineffective. There's something wrong in your intervention skill set, because you are often, do you have a QA in looking at, except the medical aid, saying, how long is this therapy going? It's going on for 3 years and we don't see changes. In fact, it's getting worse, or we can't pay you anymore. And then all psychologists get up in arms because the medical aid doesn't want to pay and mental health is such a big issue. Meanwhile, we're not looking at their competency. We're not looking at, is this person really dealing with what they're supposed to be dealing with, or are they keeping the person there because this is a milking cow? And if I've got a handful of those milking cows, I know my expenses are met. You know, and then I'll look at, how can I not go into custody work? Can I not go into, you know, the court system? Can I not get close to the family advocate in my area because there's money there? Parenting plans can cost you a couple of R100,000. It shouldn't be that way. So I'm saying that money plays a role, and it ought not to. And I think people in power, the legislature, the people in charge of our judiciary at the top, will hear you when you raise these things in the fashion that I'm hearing from your questions and from what I hear SACCAR is about. I think you need to put it out there. Besides doing your other advocacy and support work, I think you need to be able to go to the key people and get the law to work for all parents, not just those who can afford to diddle or manipulate the system, and in turn manipulate the entire judicial system to their own ends, manipulate professionals, and make good professionals look like they're corrupt.
Absolutely. And of course, your suggestion there about an integrated interdisciplinary panel that can assist in these child access matters and centering the mental health of the child is certainly a proposal we'll take forward. The Children's Amendment Bill is doing visits to the different provinces currently, and we'll certainly take that proposal forward to them in our different provinces. SACCAR members will be there. Comment, sadly, parents who've had bad marriages wreck their children's marriages through control to live out their expectations. They don't realize they're ruining future lives and happiness of innocent lives. They want to take over sons and daughters of others as they want control. My last two questions for you, Prof, before we let you go. What are the benefits of co-parenting and the child having access to both sides of their family as opposed to child alienation? It may sound like a very obvious question, but I think coming from you, pointing out the benefits of co-parenting versus alienation is certainly going to make an impact.
Well, look, the incidence of divorce and disruption in family life is growing alarmingly. So it's becoming almost normative to have that situation. And therefore, what happens because adults who are close are no more close should not be visited on the children. The children should be left, and the law says this, left in the same position that they were used to when things were hunky-dory. So it's incumbent on everybody to ensure that that obtains in the best interests of the child, not for my interests as a professional, not for somebody else's interests as an advocate of this matter or anybody else dealing with it. We ought to be able to create a better life for that child rather than the harm that clearly that becomes clearly evident with the types of examples given by the professionals. And that person ought not to be then needing the therapy if the home environment was wholesome, if all their parental backgrounds played a role in their upbringing. It's surely beneficial. They can then make their choices. I don't want to go to grandma's house because I don't like X. I love to go to grandma's house because this is what I get. So that child will give that indication. We don't need to twist them and manipulate them out of the joy of enjoying full parental alignment, full parental identification from both sides. So that's the obvious one, and it ought, you know, and interestingly, most professionals will agree, yes, we should have that. In practice, they then end up doing exactly the opposite because of all the reasons I've said. It's important also that we should, you know, when people have disagreements, what they tend often to do is look for as much support as they can get for their own position. And you hear, I've experienced that, you hear people say, you know, I'm still good friends with. And I think to myself, why not? Why should you? Because we have a problem, not have the good relationships. So in our society needs waking up, needs to be educated about dealing with reality. And that reality means in development so that they enjoy best that we are able to provide them.
Absolutely. You know, Prof, bringing me to my last question. Here's a comment here: premarital counseling and relationship guidance must happen at school and universities. Absolutely agree with that. About 15 to 20 years ago, when you and I had first met, you said to me that I need to focus a lot of what I do on the rights of children because children are ignored and their voices are not heard. And it's the same position that you maintain now. It's the same position that I maintain now. And it's why we've now launched the South African Coalition for Child Access Rights. What is your message to alienated children who might one day look for this conversation to see what Professor Sats Cooper said? What is your message to those kids, to their families, and finally to SACCAR on its launch?
Little child who was traumatized and alienated, I would say that we too can overcome bad parenting. That memory need not blight us into how we should be dealing with our own children. In fact, it should enable us to care much more and be more loving, more concerned, more involved, more compassionate, and more caring and considerate of everybody. Disagree, of course, because dissent is healthy, but don't allow any hatred and don't allow any warped socialization to be visited on your child. Because if what's affected you, you visit on your child, it creates for a dangerous situation. That nightmare that you experience should not be visited on your children. Otherwise, their children will continue to live that nightmare. And unfortunately, that's exactly what our leadership does. They pass on the buck. The debt that we're paying, I believe we're paying over R1 billion a day, is being passed on. Who's going to pay for it? Our children's children's children.
Right.
So it's that kind of thing. So we eschew responsibility, we deny things, and then when the children raise questions, and I think we need to look at things differently. I know a lot of people are talking about democratic family styles and so on. Yes, we should engage with our children, but also children need to know what are the minimum rules for participation. You cannot do certain things in a household that tries to create an environment for your upbringing when you just throw things around and do certain things, etc. So there are rules, but those rules also are contextual. And I think if we, again, impact on the education system so that we can make sure that they deal with real issues that we ought to be educating our children to prepare for, we would do a hell of a lot.
Thank you, Prof. Cooper. And finally, your comment to SACCAR on the launch of the South African Coalition for Child Access Rights. What's your message on our launch?
I've given you a few takeaway messages, but I think that you should be quite clear about your approach. Don't allow the form and content to get confused. There's messaging for different spaces. There's advocacy in different ways that you need to do, because if you don't, you will perpetuate one size fits all, which is the terrible system we've grown up in. And we need to have granularity in what we do. But I agree, certain key things that you put out there must be put out there in vociferously and with evidence, with knowledge and fearless, so that you get, if half what you do becomes successful by the next 3 years, then you can celebrate the 30th anniversary of our democracy with fanfare. And I wish you luck.
Thank you, Prof. That's an objective and a goal that we're certainly going to aspire to. Thank you for joining us today in the launch of SACCAR on Youth Day, of course, quite significant. And for always being a voice for children and for youth. We thank you very much, and we hope to interact with you more in future.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Professor Stats Cooper. Wow, what a fascinating conversation. Certainly a legend in advocacy, in psychology, in socioeconomics, and always having an interest in the rights of our children and our youth. Well, now we start drawing to the close of the launch of SACCAR this Youth Day, June 16th, also known as the Soweto Uprising Day, perhaps more correctly, in South Africa. To highlight to you some of the activities that SACCAR will be busy with strategically over the next couple of months and years, we're going to begin with monthly events where we bring together survivors of child alienation abuse. Some of them are now adult survivors who speak about their experiences. We'll also bring together individuals, groups, and organizations that are working in this space to share their experiences and to talk about ways forward. How can we work together so that we center and make paramount the mental health rights of our children when it comes to matters of access and alienation? We're also going to be launching support groups there, as mentioned by Professor Sats Cooper, for targeted parents, and of course where alienating parents would like support and resources, where they see what they're doing is harming their children. Of course, we'll be very happy to assist with that as well. And of course, we'll be working with youth groups to help them with the skills that they need for peer-to-peer counseling so that they can say to their friend, what you're going through seems to be a form of abuse called child alienation. These are the signs. This is the kind of impact it can have, from depression and anxiety to suicidal thoughts to violent behavior to matters of not being able to focus at school. And this is where you can get help. These are the organizations working in this area. These are the professionals who genuinely have your best interests at heart. So these are some of the activities that SACCAR is going to be busy with. In conclusion, of course, thank you very much to all of our participants in the launch of SACCAR today. First and foremost, Professor Sat Cooper for joining us, making the time for us today on Youth Day, as well as Solomon Mondlane from the Amazing Dads Network, and Carmen Moki from SACCAR, South African Coalition for Child Access Rights. They're stepping in there for Kesan Raman, who's having an internet issue, very common in South Africa. And remember every day to ask yourself, what am I doing to make a difference with the children in my life, in my community, in society, in South Africa, and around the world? How am I elevating their mental health, their right to be heard, and their human rights? So until we see you again, thank you very much for joining us for the launch of SACCAR. Remember to catch SACCAR's interview on Salam Media yesterday. You'll find that on our group. You'll find the link there. A very big thank you to Transformative Health Justice for partnering with us in the launch of SACCAR and for our ongoing programs. For this Youth Day, Shabnam Palesa Mohammed signing out and saying, remember, the best interests of the child are paramount. Take care of yourself and each other. Goodbye.